a great pleasure to welcome you here to St Francis College, recognising that we're on the lands of the Yagara people, the Yagara Nation and the Turrbal mob. We respect elders past and present and recognise and value the work of elders present and emerging as we work towards better pathways, Magarata reconciliation with our First Nations people. We have as a great pleasure today a visitor from the University of Bethlehem, and I'll invite Reverend Greg Jenkins to introduce him for us.
Can I hear?
Oh, you can't hear?
No, it doesn't work.
Okay, welcome to St Francis College.
Okay, so is that working now? Still not working.
No, it's working.
It is, but it's not loud enough, I think.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to play with that bit of technology. Fiona might come back in. Hopefully. I'm not familiar with that black box, so I'm not going to touch it. And well. So apparently the mic is not, this PA system is not loud enough for people sitting further. So it is working, but not sufficiently apparently. And for those, for the actual recording and the live streaming, the video, the audio is being captured by that device over there. And the camera will follow whoever is talking. So it'll just focus it on Mazin. So welcome everybody. We're glad you could get here to join us for this important event. Mazin is a legend in his own time and in his own country, which of course is Palestine. Friends of mine in Nazareth, when they heard that we had Mazin in Brisbane, were awesomely impressed. And to my surprise, they knew exactly who he was. In fact, even my daughter, when I said, "Oh, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but we've got a guy called Professor Qumsiyeh, we've got a person called Mazin Qumsiyeh. I remember Mazin, he spoke at a Sabille conference, must have been 10, 12 years ago when Claire was at a young adults Sabille gathering. So she remembers you and she knew exactly what you talk about, and you're famous amongst friends and family far afield. Mazin is the founder and the volunteer director of the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, which is part of the Bethlehem University, which you can probably guess where that is located. Bethlehem University is a Roman Catholic university in Bethlehem, the West Bank in Palestine. Is your president still the Jesuit from New Zealand? No, he's moved on. Okay. So I'm not sure who the president of Bethlehem University is these days, but there have been some local connections there as well. He's previously served at a number of universities in the US, including Tennessee and Duke and Yale. A prolific researcher and publisher, fantastic speaker, whether it's a small group or a larger group, or and a person who, once you're on his mailing list, you will know so much about what is going on inside Palestine. So it's a great delight to have had you here all of this week. We're glad that we could host you here at the college as well. I think all the transport arrangements have more or less fallen into place with the nick of time, inshallah. So that's all been great. And we're looking forward to your presentation today. And it is being recorded as well as live streamed, and others will catch up with your presentation afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. So welcome everybody, and thanks for hosting us. Thanks to Greg, thanks to Ruth for her hospitality in her house, and it's been very nice to be here in nice weather and everything, and for Michelle who took us around many locations that we had to go from one place to another. So it's been running smoothly so far. I wish I could say the same for where I come from, where nothing seems to run smoothly anymore. But that's what we will talk about today. So I just spoke to some high school students, and I was, I'm using the same slides pretty much, because it is basically not a very complicated problem. It is easy to explain it in very few words. I could even explain it, and we will guess those in a minute. But I used the analogy at the high school of, because my background in medical genetics, I use the analogy of medicine, saying in medicine, there are 5 pillars of modern medicine. Take a patient history so that you can understand what's going on, whether it's a congenital problem or not. Take current symptoms so that you can make the right diagnosis. That's number 3. For the current illness, if it's not congenital. And number 4, you offer a therapy. And number 5, based on that therapy and what happened with other patients who had the same illness, you give the patient a prognosis, what is going to happen. So the same thing applies for social phenomena, in my humble opinion, is we need to take patient demographics, patient history, and understand a little bit about this patient, because, well, maybe it's hopeless. Maybe it's a congenital problem that you cannot cure, right? So what is this patient we are talking about? It's a small geographic area called Palestine. It's at the intersection of continents. Hence, it was made special because humans migrated out of Africa to the rest of the world through Palestine, through this geographic area. Even birds today migrate from Eurasia to Africa and back every year. 500 million birds have migrated, although their numbers have been decreasing with climate change and habitat destruction, etc., that Israel has committed an ecocide in addition to a genocide in our country. But we'll come to that in a minute. But this is the geographic area. And this is just some of the habitats. You can see different habitats, different landscapes, different plants. We actually have more species of plants in Palestine than the whole of England. And this richness is not just due to the geographic area being at the intersection of continents, but also unique geology, geologic history, with the lowest point on Earth. As you know, the Dead Sea near Jericho is the lowest point on Earth, so it has different species. And then we have mountains, Mediterranean climates, etc. This richness in habitat is what allowed it to become part of the Fertile Crescent, where humans first went from hunter-gatherers to agricultural community, where our ancestors first domesticated plants and animals. This Fertile Crescent, which you see in the picture on the upper right, included areas like what was called Mesopotamia, the land between the 2 rivers. And that's today Iraq and Iran, and also southern Turkey and Syria and Lebanon and Palestine. Palestine was the western part of that Fertile Crescent, where our ancestors domesticated things like the olive tree. You wouldn't have olives if it wasn't for our ancestors, or wheat, or barley, or lentils, or chickpeas, hummus, and things like that. So this is what the Fertile Crescent is. Now, when people went from hunter-gatherers to agricultural communities, they had time on their hand. So they not only invented agricultural tools like plowing and pickaxe and things like that, but they also invented things like the alphabet that you use now. The ABC actually comes from our ancestors. Jesus spoke Aramaic, and this is the Proto-Aramaic alphabet. On the left side, you can see its evolution to the ABCs of the Latin alphabet, which happened in our region also, in that western part of the Fertile Crescent. And the A is from Aleph, because the bull was worshipped by the Canaanitic ancestors with the 2 horns. The B is from Beit, which is a house. line and half circle. You open it, becomes a B in Arabic or Hebrew, or Aramaic, modern Aramaic, like Syriac and things like that. K is from kaf, which is a hand in Aramaic and Arabic. By the way, there's, the Palestinian Arabic actually includes 20–30% of its words are actually Proto-Aramaic words, not classical Arabic. So that's because our ancestors and Jesus himself, what did he speak? He spoke Aramaic. So when we say in Arabic, Barra and Jua and Palestinian Arabic, that's not the classical traditional Arabic of Dakhil and Kharij. That's Aramaic in the same way that Jesus spoke. Mel Gibson did a movie about Jesus that was in Aramaic. I didn't need a lot of the translations underneath it, because that's the language. So anyways, these people, the Aramaic-speaking Canaanitic people, are the origin of us, the people of that part of the world. And they were always rich. They always had good resources. Even their depictions you can see in hieroglyphics on the top and in Mesopotamian relief on the bottom is showing them always with rich supplies, bringing to the kings gifts and so on. And these are the indigenous people, my ancestors. These pictures are pseudo-colorized, by the way, but they are over 130 years old. This is the first color pictures of Palestinian women taken by National Geographic in 1916. Amazing pictures. They had the first National Geographic that was in color was included an article about Palestine. This is one Palestinian Christian woman, one Muslim woman on the same page of National Geographic. This is the village I was born in. One of these guys here, I don't know which one because we don't have a record. But clearly it was in the neighborhood that my great-grandfather was born in, the Qumsiyeh clan, if you want. So this is what they looked like 130 years ago in my village. Beit Sahur is, by the way, the shepherd's field where the shepherds heard the angels sing, went up to Bethlehem. The house I was born in, which is near this place, is literally just down the hill from the Church of Nativity, less than a kilometer away. This is actually one of my great grandmother walking down the steps of the old house. Now, Palestine has always been multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, and even multilingual society. Before Israel was created, on top of Palestine, there were 44 languages spoken in Palestine, not just Arabic and Hebrew, but also Aramaic, Syriac, Ethiopian, Amharic, and so forth, Italian, Spanish, etc. Because we had different people. It's a cross-section of continents. So we've always had that diversity of people. This picture is from 1932, when religious and secular leaders met together to object to the Balfour Declaration, which is a declaration basically by the British Empire, which had no business in our part of the world, decided, and didn't control our part of the world even at that time, decided that they will get control of that part of the world and they will make a Jewish state there, Jewish homeland for Jewish people. Now, you can imagine why these people would object to that. It doesn't take a genius to understand why you would object to that. Well, you object to it because you like this diversity. You like this pluralistic society, and you don't want it to be all Jewish, all one language, all one religion, all one culture. You want to maintain that diversity. And so every single Palestinian leader at the time rejected this. Not one accepted it. From the time this foolish idea called Zionism was created to this day, still the vast majority of people in the country Christian, Muslims, and yes, also native Jews opposed this idea. Baha'i, Druze, etc. And again, it's logical that they would do that. So what is this idea of Zionism and who came up with this silly idea? It was actually the British Empire. That's not surprising to you. The British Empire creates lots of problems around the world, from splitting Kenya and Tanzania and destroying the Maasai lands, to what they did in India and Pakistan, to what they did in Australia, to what they did in North America. That's typical for the British Empire. So they basically hired the services of a guy named, is this showing? So they hired the services of this guy who happened to be the governor of South Australia at the time, second governor of South Australia, Lieutenant Colonel George Gowler, in 1840s. And he developed a study. It took him a few years. He got it published in 1847. Here's the title of the study. The title of the study is Tranquilization of Syria and the East, Observations and Practical Suggestions and Furtherance of the Establishment of Jewish Colonies in Palestine, the most sensible and sober remedy for the ills or miseries of Asiatic Turkey. They used to title their books like this, with a long paragraph to be a title of a book. But anyways, the British government liked his study and they approved it and then took it to Parliament, which in turn approved it in 1847. And the British government set some money aside for it. They set up a group called Jewish Colonization Association. I don't know if you know this history or not, but anyway, it's interesting that at the time there was no compunction about using the word colonization. It was common, and certainly the reason they hired this guy and tasked him with this is because he was so good at colonization in Australia, so might as well give us hints about how to colonize another country. Theodor Herzl and those guys came much, much later, 50 years later to be precise, when Herzl wrote his book, 1897, about, the Jewish state, or the Jewish state, the Judenstaat, as he put it. His language was German, of course, and spoke some Yiddish, but mostly German. And Herzl was a Zionist. His father was a Zionist. Goller, by the way, he said there are two obstacles to this project. One is convincing enough Jews that it's good for them. The second was convincing enough Christians that this is somehow related to biblical history and stuff like that, and gathering of Jews and stuff like that. Because if they read the scripture correctly, they wouldn't come up with that conclusion. So we have to come up with another interpretation to convince enough Christians. And indeed, when this was presented to the British Parliament in 1847, the only two members of the British Parliament who happened to be Jewish were opposed to the idea. I said, what are you going to do, ship us to this backwater of the Ottoman Empire like you shipped those criminals to Australia, the penal colonies and all that? That doesn't work for us. But anyways, the project went on, and every single, whether it's an imperialist like Balfour or Goller or any of these guys, or any of the Jews and Christians I convinced to support it, everybody knew what it entailed, what it means. It means the ethnic cleansing of Palestine from its people. And I don't have time, but I can show you, send you in my book, Sharing the Land of Canaan. I talk quote after quote that they knew in the late 19th century, not even close to the Second World War, or anything like that. They knew that this creation of a Jewish state in Palestine meant the Palestinians have to go. Meant us, Christian, Muslims, Baha'i, Druze, anybody else who happens to be not Jewish has to go. Not only that, but any Jew who opposes it is considered an enemy. And there was assassination of Palestinian Jews who stood up against this project. Because obviously you want to make a Jewish state. How are you going to do it? Well, you have to remove the local people. It's as simple as that. Palestine was very heavily populated with its own people. There was not 1 square mile of the country that's cultivable that was not cultivated or used as pastures for the sheep and goats and camels of the pastoral people. So, the only way to do it is to remove the local people. And that's indeed what happened. If you want details, you can read the Israeli historian Ilan Pape, who wrote a book called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. The map on the right shows in red spots the Palestinian villages and towns that were depopulated. And that's how we ended up as refugees. That's how basically out of 15 million Palestinians in the world today, 8 million of us are refugees or displaced people. This didn't happen suddenly. It happened via stages, like all colonial entities happen via stages. In fact, the shrinking map of Palestine on the top was inspired by the shrinking map at the bottom of the United States. There's an updated version of it, but it was first drawn in 1998 by my son when he was 13 years old, because he saw the shrinking map of the United States. He was going to middle school in the US and showed me the map similar to the one at the bottom and said, "Is this what happened in our country, in your country?" I said, "No, your country, but let's draw one like that." So he did. This happened also in other countries, certainly in Australia and North America and South America and Africa. For example, this is South Africa under colonization, under apartheid, where the blacks were relegated to 11.5% of the land of South Africa in what was called then Black Bantustans. And in our case, actually, it's worse because we are relegated to only 8.3% of the land of Palestine. This is the diagnosis then. It's called displacement settler colonialism. Please remember those 3 words. Our problem is not a religious conflict. It's not a military occupation. It's none of those things. It is displacement settler colonialism. How do I know that this is the diagnosis? How do good doctors agree to a diagnosis? When I was at Yale Medical School, we used to have a pathology conference and get together and talk about cases. And sometimes we disagreed and we convinced each other. How did we convince each other? Well, the symptoms and the tests, if they fit the diagnosis, we say, hey, that symptom doesn't fit this. So let's reconsider the diagnosis. So let me give you a quick symptom from my own village, the Shepherd's Field, Beit Sahur. In 1988, we engaged in a revolt called the Cow Revolt. I don't know how many of you heard this story, but we had smuggled in some cows against an Israeli military order that says we cannot own milking cows. We can own milking mice and milking rats and milking goats, but not milking cows. And then, of course, the Israeli military discovered we had these cows, ordered us to kill them within 24 hours after some negotiations. 48 hours, they came back, the cows were gone, disappeared. Where are the cows? We don't know anything about cows. So the Israeli military started a military operation called Operation Hunt Cow. Literally to find these cows and kill them or sell them or something. Because Palestinians are not allowed to own cows. Only Jewish settlers are allowed to own cows. Now, if you think about this one small, tiny symptom, what does it fit? Does it fit, let's say, a religious conflict? Of course not. The cows are not Muslim or Jewish or Christian, to my knowledge. You know, the owners of the cows, 70% of the people of my village are Christian, 30% are Muslim, and we were all in on this crime of hiding those poor 18 cows. There's a documentary on YouTube, you can see it, called The Wanted 18, because there were 18 cows. So doesn't fit a religious conflict. Does it fit military occupation? Sorry, it does not fit the military occupation. Because Germany occupied France for many years. They didn't tell the French people, you can't have your cows, you can't have milk, you can't have French cheese and vache qui rit or anything else. You know, so US occupied Iraq. They didn't tell the Iraqi people, you can't have cows. So what is this with can't have cows? Well, does it fit what other diagnosis you can think of? The only diagnosis it fits is displacement settler colonialism. It's the same reason why these beautiful European settlers bringing knowledge and modern technology of agriculture and light to the nations and, you know, and manifest destiny, shiny city on a hill. They killed 2 to 3 million of these creatures called buffaloes. Why did they kill the buffalo? They hate buffaloes? No, the buffaloes were food for the indigenous people. And you don't want the indigenous people to have food because you don't want them. So simple as that, logical. So symptoms fit the diagnosis. Then you know you have the right diagnosis. And then you can talk about therapy. But you cannot talk about therapy by giving a wrong diagnosis. If you're a doctor and you tell me, let's say, God forbid, I have cancer. And I go to the doctor, I say, I have a headache, I have a skin rash, and I have anemia. Oh, that's easy. You know, for the headache, take some aspirin. For the anemia, eat some spinach. And for the skin rash, here's this nice cream. You know, he'd be killing me, not curing me, he'd be killing me. So I think it's important to make the right diagnosis because then you can offer the right therapy, chemotherapy or whatever. So I hope I convinced you with this point because other things depend on it. Now, the symptoms, you can talk endlessly about the symptoms. And you can accept the colonial narrative of the symptoms. Those savages are attacking us. We're only circling the wagons, defending ourselves against people who hate us. We don't understand. We don't even care to understand why they hate us. But we are just defending ourselves and we are forced to kill them. As Golda Meir said, you know, I can forgive Palestinians for killing our people, but I can't forgive them for forcing us to kill their children, for forcing us to kill their children. By resisting, of course, colonization. But colonization is violence. You know, I cannot come to your nice home and land here in Australia and say, hey, nice house, would you please kindly move away so that I can raise my flag on it and make it mine? You know, of course, colonization requires violence. So violence is intrinsic to that. All the symptoms around that can be easily understood, can be easily conceptualized, can be easily dissected, if you want, logically, without emotion, even without having to say good, bad, or evil, by the way, because I think all humans are colonizers in one way or another. Now that we destroyed this beautiful blue planet, we're talking about colonizing Mars, right? You know, I hope there's no life on Mars that we are going to be destroying in the process. But it seems something intrinsic to this species of ours, colonization activities. There's not a single country on Earth, by the way, that escaped this scourge or this disease. Sort of like COVID-19, I'm sure everybody got it. Whether they felt it or didn't feel it, everybody got it. All right. Now, the symptoms can be many. Here's one symptom, for example. You know, any Jew in the world is considered by the State of Israel as national of the state, part of Am Israel, part of the people of Israel, including converts to Judaism, but not converts from Judaism to another religion. If you convert from Judaism to Christianity, you lose, quote unquote, your right to become an automatic citizen of the state of Israel. And, whereas Palestinians don't have any rights. These are two friends of mine, Ghada Karmi and Ellen Siegel, in 1973, and much later holding the same signs. Now, the symptoms also include the violence. I don't want to spend too much time on this aspect. I do want to say something about Gaza Strip because it's now in the news and you hear about it a lot, and the genocide that's going on in there. Why is Gaza Strip? Well, what is the story of the Gaza Strip? And it has nothing to do with Hamas, by the way. The blockade and attacks on Gaza started before even Hamas took power in Gaza in 2006. It's because they discovered gas fields next to Gaza. These gas fields are worth $200 billion. And they are exporting now the Gaza field gas to Europe to replace Russian gas. Russian gas being denied Europe because mysteriously the two major pipelines connecting Russia to Northern Europe blew up, an act of God. So anyways, that's one of the reasons. Another reason is Gaza is, as you see, is a small strip of land on the coast of the Mediterranean. There's the West Bank, that kidney-shaped area where I am from, but then there's the Gaza Strip, and it kind of is an inconvenient position because Israel is thinking not in terms of having it. Israel is the only country on earth, by the way, that never defined its borders, doesn't believe in borders. I challenge you, show me any Israeli who says this is our borders, and that's it. No, they're still ambitious to go from the Nile to the Euphrates. That's for them the promised land that God gave to the Jewish people as they see it. They want to build an empire. And this is not my statement. This is a statement of Israeli leaders themselves, including the current prime minister. And he even said something, although with more diplomatic language in English at the United Nations. He said, we will dominate the Middle East, we'll have normalization with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and we'll be the link between Asia and Europe. That's a replacement for the China-Europe connection, which is the Road and Belt initiative that China and other countries spent close to $6 trillion on it. So he said this at the United Nations. But on Israeli TV, where I got the screenshot below that, he was more explicit about building a Jewish empire in the Middle East, basically, and mentioning not a single word about Palestine or Palestinians. When did he do these speeches? Both to his people in Hebrew and to the world in English. It was September 2023. September 2023. Precisely a month later, or less than that even, there was the Gaza Ghetto Uprising. And the resistance movement in Gaza said part of the Gaza Ghetto Uprising, main reason, they said the main reason is to thwart Israeli and American plans in the Middle East. This is what they said. So whether, I don't happen to support Hamas, of course, an Islamist movement, but you have to understand the history of what was transpiring on the ground. And so what happened October 7, as tragic as it is, with civilians also killed, in addition to the military, Israeli military that were killed. It was like the Gaza Ghetto Uprising of Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, same thing. It was people cooped up in this concentration camp called Gaza, literally like a concentration camp, 2.3 million people squeezed in less than 250 square miles. with blockade subjected to them for decades because of the gas bills and other needs of the state of Israel. And that's what happened. Now, what transpired, of course, afterwards became very clear from the statement of Israeli leaders, like Netanyahu himself, who said he will turn Gaza into an island of ruins, which he did. 70% of the residential buildings are now destroyed with carpet bombings. Or the so-called Minister of Defense, who said we will deny food, water, electricity, medicine, etc. on the people of Gaza because we're dealing with the human animals or animal people. Some people translated the Hebrew. I think it's closer to human animals or people animals. Other leaders said the same thing. I won't belabor the issue. This translated immediately to actions on the ground in Gaza, where Israeli soldiers were proud to have killed Palestinian civilians, annihilating whole neighborhoods. 15,000 children were killed in the span of the past 6 months. Mass graves and large numbers of civilians who were killed. Carpet bombings, as you see here. This is all American weapons, by the way, 2,000-ton bombs that are dropped in the whole neighborhood from American-made airplanes like F-35s and F-15s, etc. When you look at the list of names of victims, you realize what's going on. This is just the Hassouna family, literally, just the Hassouna family. Ages who were killed are from 1 to 17-year-old. Not one of the Hassouna family was older than 17 was killed. They were injured, but not killed. Why? Because they are adults. They have more resilient bodies when you drop a bomb, like an earthquake also. A lot of children and people with fragile bodies die. So that's what happens. And then the survivors have to survive, and I won't go through this because I get emotional about it, but these are people, these are not numbers. When we speak about 120,000 people in Gaza were killed or injured, 40,000 injured, some 80,000, 80,000 injured, 40,000 killed. These are people, these are individuals with dreams and ambitions, like this student in medical school, who wrote her last message saying, I probably won't be here to write you another message. And she was not indeed there to write another message on Facebook. It's, or this guy who lost 2 children of his, one in 2001, his son, he was shielding him when the Israeli snipers were shooting at him. He ended up getting injured and severely, and his son was killed. Ended up losing his other son in the last genocide. So 23 years later, he lost another son. This is Saidam, who graduated, top Palestinian high school graduate. And sorry, when I was at this high school, I envied those kids that are going to this high school. They have such comfortable life. They, they can excel and go to the university and things like that. This girl never got to go to the university because she was killed. And she scored 99.6, an amazing percentage in what's like the general, certificates for high schools. This is Mayar and Ali, who were both killed. Their young brother miraculously survived. Targeting hospitals, Israel targeted essentially all the hospitals in Gaza except 2, destroying them and rendering them out of service. This is intentional, killing medical staff at a higher percentage than the rest of the population. When I mentioned 40,000 who were killed, if you divide 40,000 by 2.3 million, you get a certain percentage. I think it's like 1.5% or so. but medical personnel, 7% were killed. Journalists, professors at universities, school teachers were killed all at a higher percentage than the percentage of general population. This is intentional destruction of the potentiality of rebuilding Gaza. When you destroy the universities like these, when you blew them up, you can see before and after in the picture on the right. They literally destroyed the universities after they occupied them, so there was no military necessity doing this. This is what we are facing is not just a genocide by killing people, but it's also killing the potentiality of rebuilding Gaza. When they flooded those tunnels that Hamas built, Hamas and the Islamic resistance and other even communist resistance movements have built tunnels in Gaza. Just like Vietnam, they built tunnels to resist the occupiers, they built tunnels. So Israel has flooded the tunnels with seawater, pumping huge amounts of seawater into those tunnels. This is catastrophic environmentally. The water aquifer, which was largely unusable before that even, is now completely unusable and will not be usable for decades to come. The only way it can be replenished is if you allow massive amounts of water that Israel has blocked from the Hebron Mountains coming down to Gaza. They have blocked them with dams, and they use the water in Israel. If they remove these dams and allow the water to run to replenish the aquifer and wash out the salt that's in the aquifer. But that could take decades, if possible. I'm not sure it's possible. Which brings me to the environmental issues of colonization, which is the main theme of what I want to talk about. Because people hear about these other symptoms of colonization, but they never hear about the environment and its effect of colonization on the environment. Now, as you know, globally, there are 5 major threats that impact the environment, even here in Australia, like climate change, habitat destruction, pollution, invasive species. There's a whole department in the government that deals with invasive species, etc. But at least here you are not faced with our ongoing colonization, active colonization, active wars. War itself is destructive to the environment. And these things are connected to each other. For example, in just the sorties that Israel flew over Gaza to drop those bombs, ignored the effect of the bombs, just the sorties, jet flights over Gaza, the Guardian newspaper calculated, based on Israeli and other sources, 254,000 sorties of jets. And they calculated how much each jet produces in greenhouse gases. And it turns out just in the first 60 days of bombing Gaza, those Israeli jets produced more greenhouse gases emissions than the whole Central African Republic produced in a whole year. Just in 60 days, from one activity only, which is the jets flying over Gaza. And you can imagine now we're in month 7, we're almost at the end of month 7, 215 days now, or 12 days of this. So you can imagine what is the impact, environmental catastrophe that we face. So these 6 threats to our environment are interlinked and interwoven. Pollution, for example, Israel drops bombs that are, coated in the material is depleted uranium enriched substances, or white phosphorus, for example. And the remnants of these things are catastrophic for the environment. But again, this didn't start October 7th. It started long before. October 7th was one day. And here in the Western media, even journalists asking me, what about Hamas on October 7th? I said, it's one day. Israel felt like we feel every single day for the past 76 years. That's 27,740 days or whatever it is. And so we've been killed and destroyed. Civilians have been injured, kidnapped, you know. I have a brother-in-law who was kidnapped 3 times to spend 3 episodes in jail. He was never charged with anything. He was kidnapped from his house. He was a teacher, physics teacher. They put him in jail under what's called administrative detention for 6 months. Then they can renew it for another 6 months. Or they release him and then they capture him again, and then the 6-month count can start again. So he spent nearly 2.5 years of his life in jail, missed the birth of 2 of his children because of what? Because Israel likes to do that to indigenous people, like all colonizers do. And this was in the 1980s, you know. This is not a new phenomena. It was happening in 1948, etc. The genocide, when you talk about genocide, it didn't start on October 7th. We had the incremental genocide from actually December 1947, to be precise. December 1947 is when the Zionist militia started killing Palestinian civilians in large numbers. And they committed dozens of massacres between December 1947 and November 1949, when they finally had those ceasefire lines declared with Jordan and Egypt and so forth. When you think about these massacres, I mean, my mother, who was a school teacher, she died last year. God bless her soul. She even remembered her friend in the last week of her life on this earth. She remembered her friend who she lost in 1948, who was a teacher, fellow teacher. They were both going to teacher school in Jerusalem. And her friend was from Deir Yassin. And once she heard that Deir Yassin, there was problems there, she decided to leave and go to her students, worried about her students in Deir Yassin. And she was killed with her students and massacred, all the students in the school of Deir Yassin. This was April 1948, a month before the State of Israel was declared. So this was common phenomena. It's not something new for us. The only difference is scale. When we are talking about literally now, a child is killed every 10 to 15 minutes. So the time we're going to spend here together, you can imagine how many children are being killed. The scale is much higher. That's it. But there has been other impacts on the environment which we need to talk about. For example, when Israel depopulated the Palestinian villages and towns, they uprooted all the trees around them, both domesticated trees like olives, figs, and almonds, and things like that, and also wild trees like oaks and hawthorn and carobs. And they did plant some trees. Israel likes to dub itself as a green country. So they planted some trees to replace the trees they uprooted. They planted pine trees, a monoculture of pine trees. Problem with pine trees, acidic leaves, they don't allow much undergrowth. They're also susceptible to fire in a dry climate. In Northern Europe, they are fine. But in Palestine, as you see, they start burning easily. Any spark could get it going. And so many of these forests ended up being reburned and replanted more than once. In this case, ironically, the fire that consumed the pine trees exposed the terraces that our ancestors built that showed that this area was not a bare land that Israel made the desert green as they claim, that they planted these pine trees to make the desert green. No, these were terraces with cultivation. As I told you, we are the Fertile Crescent where we did this. So this is also another project Israel did, which is diversion of the water of the Jordan River that resulted in destruction of the Jordan River basin and desertification. Israel created more desert lands than any other country, by the way, on earth as a percentage of the land by their activities. This is what River Jordan that Jesus was baptized in, what it looked like before and after. This is the lower half of it. In the northern half of it, there are still some shrubs around it. But anyway, it dropped from 1,350 million cubic meters per year to only 20 million cubic meters per year because Israel took the water from Lake Tiberias. And its lower half is not even called the river anymore. You shouldn't call it the river anymore. It's a tiny stream. You could walk across it. And, the baptism site that people visit when they go there now, actually, they enlarged and made it like pools, because otherwise, how are you going to dip people in something that's not deep enough to dip them in? So they, on both the Jordanian side and the now Israeli side, the Palestinian side, they enlarged the river there, made like a big pool so that the tourists, religious Christian tourists, could come and dip and be baptized in the River Jordan. The theft of our resources goes on. Water, for example. This graphic shows that we actually don't have a shortage of water. We get more rainfall in Palestine and Ramallah than we get in London. But unlike London, where the water goes into water aquifer is tapped to feed water the people of London. In our case, the water is tapped to use for the Israeli colonial settlements built on stolen Palestinian land. And we end up getting very limited water or no water. In the case of the Gaza Strip now, there's no water except imported or some rainfall. I could talk endlessly about these environmental impacts, but I wanted to show you this hill. Greg, I think you showed it to me. Also, that this is the hill, or no, it was John who showed this. John Fraser showed me that he said he was impressed that he came one day, saw this hill, nice green hill, and then a year later he came back and saw it was all being denuded and gone to be made into a Jewish-only colony. This was the only forested area between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. Again, the idea that Israel is a green country or that made the desert bloom is such a blatant lie, and the data show it very clearly. I don't want to belabor this issue, but the destruction of our trees continues. Even this week, Israel uprooted many olive trees. Some of them are 2,000-year-old olive trees that have been alive when Jesus was walking between them. So, I'll skip. Okay, now what is the prognosis for settler colonialism, or at least displacement settler colonialism? Fortunately, you have many countries you can measure and look at, and you may quibble with some of my examples here, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's an issue of where you want to be. For most countries, the last scenario is the one that happened, most countries on earth, where the descendants of the colonizers and the descendants of the colonized, who are kept in large numbers without large genocides, have been able to live together in one country. This happened in all the world, essentially, by my count, at least 170 countries, including all of Europe, most of the Americas, South America, certainly Central America, Caribbean islands, North America, Mexico and Canada, etc. And of course, all of Europe. all of Europe was colonized. Again, you may quibble with that, but I mean, you'd have to explain to me why southern Switzerland speaks Italian. They were colonized by the Romans. So Britain was colonized by the Romans. And I'm sure they didn't all pack their bags and go back to Rome. So they remained and they intermarried and they lived in that country. So you can choose which scenario you want. But for us Palestinians, we've always advocated what? We've advocated pluralistic societies, diversity, human diversity, as I said, also biological diversity, which is also being impacted by colonization. So that's what we advocate. We don't advocate that there be genocide or removal of these things. If that's a prognosis, that's what will happen. And please don't think there's a forced solution that I somehow intentionally excluded. There's no forced solution. I challenge you to show me a colonization, anti-colonization struggle that's ended up with the two-state, quote-unquote, two-state solution, where you split the country between colonizers and colonized. It doesn't happen, will not happen, has never happened. And there are many reasons for that. I don't have time to go through them. If you are interested, you can read my book, Sharing the Land of Canaan, to understand this subject. That leaves one thing and one thing only from the 5 pillars of modern medicine, which is therapy. And therapy, if this is not a congenital disorder, you know, when you got COVID-19, when I got COVID-19, my doctor said, well, if you're healthy, you don't have, you know, immune problems, your B and T cells are strong, you know, you don't worry about it. Your body will take care of it by its own resistance. Of course, he also said, well, it doesn't hurt to get some external help. So take some vitamins, vitamin C, zinc, whatever, lemon juice. Chicken soup is good, but it boosts your immune system. So getting some help from outside is not a harmful thing. Same for social phenomena. And I say resistance is key. The resistance is key. And to be blunt about it, all colonial, anti-colonial struggles involved resistance from the local people. All of them involved resistance by various means. Most of it nonviolent, yes, but a small portion of it is armed resistance. You cannot ignore that portion. That's also natural in the sense of understanding concepts, not in the sense of excusing or whatever. I personally wrote a book called Popular Resistance in Palestine, A History of Hope and Empowerment. I speak about the Palestinian resistance that has been in hundreds of forms that are unarmed, that people ignore here, and the media here will not tell you about it. Heck, I don't think they ever even told you about the cow story. That's resistance, by the way. Why isn't that such a story did not make it to Australian media in 1988? When you have the shepherd's field and 70% of the shepherds of, you know, 70% are Christian, 30% Muslims in our village, they all engaged in nonviolent resistance. We threw our ID cards, we rejected to pay taxes to the Israeli military, we smuggled cows in. Why wasn't this on the news in the Western media when you have Christians engaged in nonviolent resistance against colonization? So anyway, I ended up writing this book about popular resistance to show this history of nonviolent resistance that existed there. For us, resistance is also reconnecting to humanity. As I said, we Palestinians believe in diversity, human diversity, and what our society was before this invasion. We had another invasion, by the way, a few hundred years ago called the Crusaders. Sorry to say this, but that was an invasion uncalled for. What is the purpose? Was it really about Catholicism or religion? No, Jesus didn't say go kill some people over in the Middle East, you know. The Sermon on the Mount is very clear about what Jesus wants from us. So why would some people in Europe decide to go do this? Not only, by the way, killing Muslims and they killed Jews, they killed also Christians who happened to have other denominations, like my ancestors were Greek Orthodox largely. Now my family is mixed, but largely then they were all Greek Orthodox, and they considered those just as much infidels as, you know, as Muslims. Was it about liberation of the holy sites? Sorry to disappoint, the holy sites were under Christian rule at the time, before the Crusaders. The Church of Nativity, for example, which is, as I said, within 10 minutes walk from my house. In the Church of Nativity, there were the Catholics, the Orthodox, the Armenian, the others, the Ethiopians. They were all worshiping in this one church. Rarely today to find churches with multiple denominations, you know. Church of the Sepulchre, the same way. So it is not true that they're liberating the Holy Land, holy sites from those infidels that are desecrating. No, what desecrate? I mean, even when Salah ad-Din liberated Jerusalem from the Crusaders, he came into one church, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. His followers said, it's time for prayer, let's pray. He said, no, I'm not going to pray in a church because then my followers will think it's okay to come and pray here. No, this is a site for Christians. He also saw a cross that had fallen. He picked it up, put it on the table. Just visited, got up. This is respect, and that's what our history is respect for different religions. I am Christian, but I consider part of my culture, this culture of coexistence, respect for other religions, etc. So when I say resistance is becoming more human, sorry, I'm taking a bit longer, excuse me, because I want to make this point. Resistance helps us connect with what is most essential for us, which is to respect other human beings, not to colonize their land, not to steal their natural resources, not to kill them, but to say, look, we have to live together. This is a holy land for everybody. We have to live in it. That's why we started this institute at Bethlehem University called Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability. My wife and I started this with our own money at Bethlehem University. We donated $250,000 US, and we're still donating money, and we're donating, more importantly, our time. Full time for the past 10 years since we started it. We've been working there 7 days a week, 16 hours a day, most days. So that's what we do, volunteering, because we believe in this mission of sustaining human and natural communities as a form of resistance, as a form of becoming more human, retaining our humanity. These are just some pictures from this. And what we do, we have animal rehabilitation unit, we have a botanic garden, and we have a community garden also where children even from the refugee camp nearby can come and grow the foods, eat together, etc. We're part of Palestine Action for the Planet, which works against climate change. Here's some of the children activities that they do. We even have a mobile museum that goes around the country when we are allowed by the Israelis. Most of the time we're not allowed to move about from one canton, one concentration camp to another. But we did it in 44 schools already. So we have a museum of natural history, museum of ethnography, We work with women, for example, to market their products and make products from organic substances like plants. We take our students to the field to encourage them. If you see the T-shirt there that says respect for the environment is equal respect for ourselves. Our motto at the museum is respect. First, self-respect. Second, respect for other human beings, regardless of their religion or background. And third, the respect for nature, for animals and plants that share this beautiful planet with us. We welcome volunteers. These are just some pictures of some volunteers picking olives, making apricot jam, working in the garden, or in this case, building this biogas unit, or cooking, eating together. These are just some of our staff members now, and we enjoy each other's company, community. Our staff is also mixed in religious affiliation, or lack thereof, if you want. This is what the museum will look like in about 1 year's time if you come. We are building this now. We raised 2/3 the money we need for this. This is the back of it, which have an elevator. I didn't raise enough money, so some things will have to wait, like the elevator itself. We built the shaft for it, but we haven't installed an elevator. So, but hopefully within a year, I'll have the money. If any of you know a rich uncle or an aunt can donate to us, please let us know. Being from Bethlehem, I want to end with this picture because this is, an icon of Mother Mary and baby Jesus. And this is a woman in Gaza. And you can see in the ruins behind her the life. If most of Europe, shows Jesus as this white guy, but Jesus is from Palestine. Sorry, it was his skin color is like mine. This color. Okay. Mother Mary is from Nazareth. My grandmother is from Nazareth, so I could show you a picture of her. Anyway, I don't know why it's connecting. I guess I hope the people online are still seeing this. But okay, good. But here it's saying connecting. But anyways, okay, I will stop here and network connection there. Okay.
You've actually dropped out of the Zoom meeting, but that's okay.
I do want to show you this slide. This is our website, palestinenature.org, and you can email me at that email. I'll also pass up a sign-up sheet if you want to be on our email list. And this is me being arrested a few times. You see my T-shirt on the upper right-hand corner, what it says? Got human rights, Palestinians don't. And I'm actually very thankful for this soldier because he posed in the right direction. So, anyways, these are pictures from global movement that's now moving to end this genocide, call for a ceasefire. Unfortunately, the people are with us, Australian people are with us, the government is not with us. So this is an Australian person who was killed in Gaza. I don't know if you know about her, Zoe Franco. She was intentionally targeted, The Australian government should raise hell about this, why you allow this to happen. Okay. Thank you. Which one?
The contact details.
Oh.
The flag, this one.
Right. And I have a short video we can show maybe after a question and answer session. People want
Yes.
Yes. Who vote with Israel. Who are these countries? The United States, Israel, Australia. Those are the three big countries.
Okay.
And then there's three other like tiny islands that are dependent on the US, Palau and Micronesia, places I've never heard of, that vote with the US because they are dependent on the US on this. Now, why would Australia vote against human rights at the UN General Assembly and give credibility to the Israeli colonial narrative by saying Israel is defending itself, for example, in the resolution against, asking for a ceasefire. Asking for a ceasefire is a basic thing of stopping wars, stopping conflict. You're not taking sides by asking for a ceasefire. Ceasefire means stop killing on both sides. And why not vote with the ceasefire? No, Israel doesn't want the ceasefire. Israel wants to continue killing, so we should side with Israel. This is even more dangerous than the weapons they are sending to Israel. It gives Israel the moral backing, if you want, that here's a great country called Australia that votes with us. Or in some cases also some European countries like France and Belgium. But I think, the situation is really, this is what my message to you Australians here. You should hold your country, your government accountable for their own laws. Australia has laws for human rights. Australia also signed international conventions, like the Convention Against Apartheid, like the Convention Against Genocide. These conventions, once you sign them as a government, they become like local law, enforceable. In fact, if any of you as lawyers, you can sue the government for violating their own laws. Because once you sign a document that says we're against genocide, it means you have to be against genocide. And genocide is being committed. And not only that, the law requires you not only to be neutral. No, it doesn't say be neutral. It says you have to stop genocide. You have to actually intervene even militarily to stop genocide. That's why Yemen is trying to stop ships going to Israel. Yemen is obeying international law. Tiny Yemen is obeying international law and the conventions than Australia or Europe is. It's strange, but that's what it is. Yemen is saying there's genocide going on. Why should we allow these ships to pass next to Yemen, going to support this genocide? If you're denying food, water, medicine, electrical Gaza, should you be supplied with weapons coming from Australia through Yemen? It doesn't make sense. So I think, we have to take these governments to task on this and challenge them. And I urge you to do this. Before I came here, a day before I left Palestine to go through Jordan, of course, because I cannot use our airport that was stolen from us, renamed from Lud Airport to Tel Aviv Airport, and then renamed to Ben Gurion Airport. We Palestinians cannot use that. I had to go through Jordan. So before I left to Jordan, I received a call from a girl that we helped in Gaza. We helped her over 23 years ago. In 2001, I believe, she came to the US. We fitted her with a prosthetic eye because she was 7.5 years old then. She was shot by an Israeli sniper. And at that time, hundreds of Palestinian children were shot in the eye between 2000 and 2005. So we brought her, fitted her with prosthetic eye. She went back to Gaza. She lives in North Gaza, but she had, with the remaining members of her family, because many of them were massacred, had to move to Khan Yunis, and then they moved to Rafah. Now they are living in a tent in Rafah. So she calls me, and because I help them occasionally on various things. I told her, well, I'm leaving to Australia tomorrow through Jordan, and what do you want me to say to Australians? She said, I don't know anything about Australia, but I said, well, the government is not with us, but the people are with us. She said, well, then please thank the people for me.
Mazin, I don't want to go too long. The most colonised people here in Australia, of course, are the Indigenous people. And just to note the early bit there, they are endeavouring to argue that they have been killing and caring for the land for probably 50,000 years. I don't know whether you're familiar with the debate that went on about a year or so ago in Australia with Bruce Pascoe, but they lay claim, of course, to this land, and they've never ceded ownership of this land in all that time. And I just thought, when I saw that go up, I thought, oh, my Indigenous friends would be a bit saddened to see that nothing happened before 10,000 BCE.
Yes.
And the other thing is, sorry,
Yeah.
we had a very sad vote last year in October that said a very big no to the Indigenous people. And Australia is in my view, a conservative country. I wouldn't expect it to vote differently, because it frightens very quickly, and it's largely a conservative country, sadly, because and that's reflected in those votes that you've mentioned. But I just thought I'd mention that certainly the colonised people here are facing a fairly grim future, given the vote we had last October.
Yeah, I mean, the similarities are chilling. I visited with Indigenous people in Perth, Adelaide, also in Sydney, and we talked about things, and the message is always the same. What is it? Why is it that we cannot mentally decolonize? And I think both the colonized people and the colonizers sometimes are infected, mentally colonized. So I wrote a chapter actually about mental colonization in another paper. The paper came out first about mental colonization of the oppressed people and how they can infect our minds to make us think we are inferior and that we cannot match their developments and their whatever civilization. That's mental colonization of the colonized people. But then there is mental colonization of the colonizers themselves, and they're imprisoned in their own minds, thinking somehow that if we admit and restore, then that somehow negates our existence or something, or that they will throw us into the sea at some point. This mentality of mental colonization of the colonized is actually more complex than the mental colonization of the colonized people. And it has to be addressed, unfortunately, because I see it all the time. In the US, certainly, I felt, obviously, coming from Palestine, the privilege of this wonderful, economic development and working in medical schools, I consider myself as part of that system that colonized. So I have to also look at myself in that sense as a US citizen. What is my responsibility? When I first went to the US, for example, the first year I celebrated Thanksgiving with a family. And then I did some investigation. I realized, wait a minute, there's something wrong about this holiday. It was actually Thanksgiving originated as a holiday for the white European settlers to thank God for allowing us to kill those Indians. And the story about, we sat down with them and they brought the corn and we brought the turkey, this is all nonsense that developed much later, So I stopped celebrating, quote unquote, Thanksgiving. So I had to decolonize my own mind as I went into the US. And I think we have to do the same thing, all of us, at some point, because as I said, this is not about Australia alone or about Palestine, Israel alone, it's about the whole planet. As I said, we're now destroying planet Earth. We're talking about colonizing Mars. Why can't we respect each other, respect our environment, respect each other equals, not saying this is better than this or this is this or this. And yes, we are, many of us are not responsible for the sins of our ancestors, but we also need to collectively take on this. I consider myself, I have nothing to do with what happened in Nazi Germany or of Hitler or of any of this stuff. But he is a fellow human being and was there and did these horrible things. So I take responsibility for that, even though I have nothing to do with it, not my ancestor or me or anything else. I also can take credit for people like Einstein, a brilliant Jewish scientist. Why not? Why do we have to think tribally? Why can't we think as humans? The tribe becomes the earth, if you want. And we take credit for the good things, and we take upon our shoulder that cross of what other people did to other people. Why is there a Holocaust Memorial Museum here when there's not a memorial museum for the genocide of the indigenous people? It is important. Yes.
Oh, yes. You mentioned, or I understood you to mention that you were, there was no such thing as there could not be a two-state Israel and Palestine. So what do you see as the resolution to this terrible stuff? Genocide.
Very easy. If you want a roadmap to peace, there's something called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1949. First draft of it was written by a Jew. It's a brilliant document. The only quibble I have with it, economic rights are not mentioned. The right to decent living, etc. But the rest of it is perfect. Insist on implementing it. Human rights is all what we are asking for. It's not a matter of what the political structure, two-state, one-state, confederation. I'm actually, personally, if you ask me, I'm post-nationalist. I don't believe in nationalism. I don't believe the concept of nation-state is an appropriate concept for the 21st century. That was an anachronistic system developed in Europe in the 19th century when Europe was transitioning from empires and had to find another system. Empires were collapsing. So the Austro-Hungarian Empire dissolved itself to become Hungary, Germany, Austria countries, states, as they call them, nation states. The problem with that's why you saw discrimination in Europe shoot up in the 19th century. Because when you are an empire, the emperor doesn't care if you're Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Baha'i, Gypsy, whatever, as long as you paid your taxes and didn't insult the Caesar or the empire, you're okay. But once you're a nation state, you want a uniformity. So Germany has to be German and Aryan and language and white bodies and etc. So Gypsy and anybody with different ideas become discriminated against. So we see discrimination in Europe go up in the 19th century. Discrimination against minorities in any country, discrimination against Catholic and majority Protestant countries, discrimination against Protestant and majority Catholic countries, discrimination against Muslims, against Jews, against Gypsies, against Roma people, etc. This started increasing in the 19th century. This is the problem with nation-state concepts that were developed in Europe. And Europe insisted to export it and bring it to us in the Middle East. The Arab world, as I said, Western Asia is my preferred term, not the Middle East, which is a colonial term. But anyway, they insisted on implementing it in our region through the Sykes-Picot Agreement and others between France and England. The US is to delineate these borders, make nation states, or split Tanzania from Kenya. There were no such countries. It's nation states. And then this caused problems and caused wars and caused First World War and Second World War. Actually, the earlier war, the Crimean War, in the mid-19th century is a world war. So actually it's not the first and the second. They should have been called the second and the third world war, because the war was also global based on nation-state concepts. But anyway, Europe, having learned its lesson, at least most of them having learned their lessons, that this leads to wars in Europe, they started to abandon this concept. They left us holding the bag, and they themselves started unifying Europe into this European Union, where you can drive now from North Europe to South Europe. You don't have checkpoints, you don't have borders, and you can live anywhere in the EU you want to as a national of the EU. So they abandoned the concept, and they left us with this concept. So when they insist that you have to develop another nation state, call it Palestine and Israel, two nation states here, this is ridiculous. Ridiculous. It's stupid. In one country, it doesn't work. There's no colonial, anti-colonial struggle that ended up in a two-state solution. You have to decolonize, period. End of story. If you don't decolonize, it doesn't matter. Even if you do two states, what about the Palestinians inside the state of Israel? Do you want them to continue to be discriminated against simply for being non-Jews? Do you want them to stand at the national anthem that talks about the beatings of a Jewish heart? How can a non-Jew, a Muslim or a Christian inside the state of Israel, stand at attention to an Israeli flag with the Star of David and a national anthem that talks about the beatings of a Jewish heart? They don't have a Jewish heart, sorry. They cannot be allegiant to this state. So it doesn't help. There's problems that are deeper. What about refugees? Because, well, if we have a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, the refugees can return there. They don't have to return to their homes and lands. But sorry, international law is very clear. Refugees have a right to return to their homes and lands, not to a homeland somewhere else. They have a right. My family from Nazareth have a right in Nazareth. My family from Jaffa has a right in Jaffa. I cannot accept that we don't have rights simply because I want a Jewish state. That is not acceptable. It's racism. And we cannot allow it in the 21st century. Sorry. And that's why I wrote a whole book about the subject, explaining why two states don't work, will not produce peace. And anyway, the Israelis are not interested in two states, one state, non-state. They don't care. They are interested in continuous colonization, continuous expansion. That's what colonialists do until somebody puts a stop to it. Show me an Israeli leader who says, I accept a sovereign Palestinian state, or even one Israeli leader who says, I accept the right of Palestinians to live in the West Bank, or live in Ramallah. Not even Jews and Palestinians from Jerusalem just in the past 10 years. Show me one leader who says, I have a right to live in Bethlehem. As Palestinian Christian, I have a right to live in Bethlehem. They say, no, we cannot say that. Because if they accept my right to live in Bethlehem, that undermines colonialism. Because what's the difference between that right and the right of my cousins who are from Jaffa or Nazareth or anywhere else? So they say, well, you can live in Bethlehem. We give you that privilege to live in Bethlehem, but we cannot accept that you have a right to be in Bethlehem, because Bethlehem is part of Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, the land of the Jewish people. Period. End of story. Go ahead.
Well, my concern is that, you know, that America is the biggest booster of Israel. It gives it billions and billions of dollars and in weapons and in aid. And what kind of role does the Christian Zionists play in the fact that it's so wedded to Israel and it's allowing its own people to suffer just so that Israel can do what it's doing?
You mean what can I don't know, just pass around this?
I want to know what the nexus is between the
Jesse,
Yeah.
you have a pen?
That's interesting to me as a Christian, because these are also Christians, but they're so Zionists at the same time.
Came here.
Now, the Zionist narrative, I'll put on my Zionist hat and tell you what the Zionists do. The Zionist narrative is very clear. Zionists, by the way, were not interested in the state of Israel because they were religious Jews who believed that this is a mitzvah and important for Jews. Most Zionists, early Zionists in the 19th century, were interested in this because they thought it's an empowerment thing. It's a self-liberating thing. And it's to fight anti-Semitism, which I faced in Europe, as I said, because of the increase in discrimination that happened in the 19th century. So they were like Herzl, for example. Herzl, whose father was Zionist, he comes from a Zionist family, but he wrote brilliantly in his book, which is titled The Jewish State, the proper translation, the Judean State. He wrote that basically we cannot be normal in Europe because they discriminate against us. And because we're a separate nation, we have to state to be like France is for the French people, Israel or the Jewish state will be for the Jewish people. And this is the logic of it for defense, for our security, for our long-term prosperity and survival. This is the logic of most Zionists. And this logic, you know, is presented and articulated very obviously by many Zionists from various stripes. Right-wing Zionists believe that, you know, like this, you've got to kill even for doing this. It doesn't matter, like Jabotinsky, so forth. There's the Ben Gurion brand of Zionism, which is labor Zionism, which says, you know, Ben Gurion said, we will try to make arrangements with the Arabs, but ultimately, with or without arrangements with the Arabs, we will expand to the rest of the country. Ben Gurion is the first one who said, by the way, we should speak with the Arabs and the international community about our willingness to split the country. And when he was challenged on this by his inner circle, he said, well, you know, in the United States, when the Europeans came, they made agreements with the natives. But once they are strong, they can break these agreements. So it doesn't matter you sign an agreement or you don't sign an agreement, you will spread to the country. And his words, his precise words actually, after we make agreements and split the country, we will expand to the rest of the country, with or without, this is his words, with or without agreements with the Arabs. This Ben Gurion was considered a moderate, and now if there's somebody with the philosophy of Ben Gurion, they wouldn't get 1% of the votes in Israel. By the way, Israel has shifted so far to the right that Ben Gurion would be considered like the Meretz party of Israel, tiny party that had no bearings on the future of the country. Whether left-wing Zionists, right-wing Zionists, they all agreed to the ultimate goal, which is a Jewish state with Jewish army, Jewish flag, Jewish anthem, Jewish laws that ensure that we are in our own country. And this is the logic of Zionism, political Zionism. There were some arguments against it from other people who said they were Zionists. They said, for example, we're religious Zionists. We believe in going back to the land of Israel as religious Jews to live there. We have no problem with those, by the way, because just like Armenians or Ethiopian Christians or anybody else, they want to come and practice their religion among us in equality, we have no problem. That's religious Zionism. There was another kind of Zionism, which is cultural Zionism, which said, cultural Zionism said that basically we would like to revive Jewish culture, Jewish language, Hebrew, to have our culture in Palestine, but we don't necessarily need the state with an army or anything else. People like Martin Buber and Judas Magnus and other people. And this is basically these two strands, religious Zionism and cultural Zionism, both kind of dissipated very quickly in the 19th century and early 20th century. And political Zionism became the dominant force among those who supported Zionism. And then, of course, there were Jews who were anti-Zionist or who were indifferent. And that was a majority of Jews. The majority of Jews were either anti-Zionist or indifferent to this issue called Zionism. American Jews, British Jews, European Jews in general. The thing that happened that changed the number of people significantly is the Holocaust, of course, the Jewish Holocaust. Many Jews in Europe who believed in integration, all this stuff, were swayed by the Zionist argument after the Holocaust. And in large enough numbers to affect actually implementing the project in 1948. That combined with the guilt of many countries about the Holocaust, feeling that they have to support this because it's somehow good for the Jews, or at least that's what the Zionists tell us. This is, I'm telling you all of this as their narrative, their version of what it is. For Jews who are opposed to this and who remained opposed to it even after 1948, the argument was this is a horrible idea. It is not going to produce security for Jews. You cannot produce security by oppressing other people or by ethnically cleansing them or by creating a Jewish-only state or Jewish discrimination against non-Jews. That's what we fought against when we lived among these other countries. Why would we want to replicate it in Palestine? And that group is a large number of Jews. I mean, now even the demonstrations against the genocide around the world is led by conscientious Jews. The blockage of the bridges in New York and San Francisco, the blockage of Grand Central Station of Congress in the US was led by Jews. Jews like Jewish Voice for Peace or Not in My Name. These organizations are actually the fastest growing Jewish organizations in the world today. And this is remarkable, mostly young people that are joining them, young Jews. So I am optimistic that eventually people will realize this. Jeff Halper said it in front of the United Nations. I don't know if you know Jeff Halper. He came as a Zionist to Palestine, a right-wing Zionist even. He came from the US, and most right-wing Zionists come from the US. He came as a right-wing Zionist, worked as an anthropologist at Ben Gurion University. And slowly, I'm still working on him. Other people, I had moved to be, for one state, for the right of refugees to return, etc. So this has changed, and he said in front of the UN, explaining why he's changing. He said Zionism lied to us. They told us that this will bring safety to Jews. And you can see today, this is his words a few years ago when I heard his speech. He said, you can see today that the Jew in Berlin is safer than the Jew in Tel Aviv. So certainly safety cannot come from this, painting stars of David on airplanes bombing refugee camps. In the back there, yeah.
Thank you, Mazin. In regard to Palestine, if one thing could take place that would truly raise your hopes in regards to this.
I'm sorry.
If one thing could truly take place that would raise your hopes in regards to the future, what would that be?
That's a good question. One thing, and I have 5.
Tell us some time.
I mean, Gramsci said, I have pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. And we Palestinians don't have the luxury of despair, of course, because it's existential for us. We cannot despair. We always have to believe there's a better future for all of us, for Israelis, for Palestinians. And we cannot continue to live as colonized, oppressed people in cantons, in concentration camps, massacred every 2 or 3 years at the whim of somebody whose family comes from Poland or Russia or wherever. We cannot think that this will remain forever. For me, as an intellectual, I draw hope from the history of humanity, that we are evolving slowly, not fast enough. But there is a hope. There is now the internet, of course, that connects us all. Come to think of it, maybe I'll tell you the story about hope and tell you why I have hope. I told you we brought girls like Liam to the US for treatment, but we also brought children to do Dabka and theater in the US. And one time we brought this group from Haida refugee camp, about 17 children and 3 adults minding them, to the US. 20 people paid for their tickets. We brought them to Connecticut. I was there at the Yale, and we toured them I was the lead organizer for their tour. And one day I was taking them from Connecticut to Vermont, a long drive. So we had 2 vans, and I was driving one van, another person was driving another van, and we're driving along. The guy sitting next to me, an adult from the Abasrur family in Haida, he and I are talking politics. This is 2001 or 2002, I think, right at the beginning of that uprising. And, it was a terrible situation then, of course, just like now. And so we were talking about the corruption of the Palestinian Authority, corruption of the US, the Israel lobby, and we were kind of down in our voices. And, down meaning spirit down, if you want. So I wasn't paying attention to what the children were doing in the back, and I didn't think they were listening to us. If I knew they were listening to us, I may have done a different conversation. But anyway, I suddenly see this tap on my shoulder, and this girl says, "ما تخاف عم مازن، فلسطين راح ترجع. Don't worry, Uncle Mazin, Palestine will be back, will be free." And I said, "Thank you, shukran, inshallah, God willing." And then I saw the guy next to me, and literally his face was changing. So at the next stop, I stopped him. I asked him, you know, what is the story? There must be more to it. Just a month ago, or I don't remember, 5 weeks ago or something. And for her to say this to us when you and I, adults, don't show signs of hope in our discussion, I felt ashamed. I said, well, you never told me that one of those children had a parent who was lost in the struggle. He said, well, we didn't want her to feel different than the others, so we kept this information away from you. But from that day, I said, I'm never going to be negative on anything. If this child can be positive, who am I, Mazin, no matter what happens to me or to my people, who am I to be pessimistic or lack of hope or anything like that? So I don't know how else to answer that.
I suspect that maybe a moment to pause and to finish the presentation. And thank you for everything you've done, but thank you for opening your heart to us just now. That was very powerful. So shukran shukran. Thank you very much. Ruth, do you want to send us out or add some other?
Thanks, if I may. So yes, thank you so much for coming and spending time with us. And it's an amazing tribute to what you've had to say and how you've had to say it, that people have been here glued to, you know, wanting to be in your presence, wanting to hear what you have to say for the best part of 2 hours. As a school teacher, I go, that means that you've really touched our hearts. You've really helped us understand things. And I guess all of us will have something in particular that we might take away. While I know you said it was hard to name one thing, most of us will have at least one thing. And I think for me, the shock is, as someone who was born and baptised in the township of Gawler in South Australia, named after Gawler, that how connected how connected we are as a human race, and how the evil of colonisation touches us all in different ways, and is another way in which we're connected on either one side or the other side of that. So thank you for the generosity you've shown, the openness you've shown, and the amazing depth of forgiveness and acceptance of fellow human beings and understanding that we're all. Thank you very much.